The windshield wipers fought against the heavy snow, but they were losing the battle. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter as her old Honda struggled up the mountain road. She should have listened to the weather warnings, but she was all ready. 3 hours behind schedule for her job interview in Denver, the engine made a terrible grinding sound, then went completely silent. The car rolled to a stop on the side of the narrow mountain road. Rachel turned the key again and again, but nothing happened. The silence was terrifying. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Of course, she was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by tall pine trees and mountains that seemed to touch the gray sky. Snow was falling so hard she could barely see 20 feet ahead. The temperature inside the car was already dropping. Rachel had dressed for a job interview, not for survival, in a Colorado blizzard. Her thin blazer and dress pants would be useless against the cold. She looked at her high heels and almost laughed. Almost, through the swirling snow, she spotted something that made her heart jump. A thin line of gray smoke was rising from somewhere deeper in the forest. That meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Fire meant people. Rachel grabbed her purse and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Snow immediately soaked through her thin shoes and started melting down her neck. She had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia would set in. The walk to the cabin felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Her feet went numb first, then her hands. She stumbled through snow that reached her knees, following that precious line of smoke like a lifeline. When she finally saw the cabin, it looked like something from a fairy tale. Log walls, a stone chimney with smoke hurling up into the gray sky, and warm yellow light glowing from the windows. But as she got closer, doubt crept in. What if whoever lived here didn't want visitors? What if they were dangerous? She remembered the stories from town. People whispered about the man who lived up in these mountains. They called him Bear because of his size. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was mean. A few claimed he was dangerous. Nobody seemed to know his real story, but everyone agreed on one thing: he didn't like visitors. Rachel stood at the bottom of the porch steps, shivering uncontrollably. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely think straight. She could die out here in the cold, or she could knock on that door and face whatever was inside. She climbed the steps and knocked. Heavy footsteps approached from inside. The door opened, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The man filling the doorway was massive. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed as wide as the door frame. His dark hair was long and messy, and his beard covered most of his face, but it was his eyes that made her take a step back. They were the palest blue she had ever seen, like winter ice. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Rachel tried to speak, but her jaw was shaking too much from the cold. "You're going to freeze to death standing there," he said finally. His voice was deep and rough, like he didn't use it very often. "My car broke down," Rachel managed to say through chattering teeth. "I saw your smoke. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help." The man looked past her at the storm, then back at her face. She could see him thinking, weighing his options. Rachel held her breath. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The warmth hit her immediately. The cabin was small but cozy, with a stone fireplace crackling in the corner. Everything was made of wood. The walls, the furniture, even the dishes she could see on a simple kitchen table. It smelled like pine and wood smoke and something that might have been soup. "Sit by the fire," the man said, pointing to a chair near the fireplace. "You need to warm up slowly or you'll make yourself sick." Rachel sank into the chair, grateful beyond words. The man disappeared into what looked like a bedroom and came back with a thick wool blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders without saying anything. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded and went to the kitchen. She could hear him moving around, opening cabinets and lighting what sounded like a gas stove. The smell of hot chocolate began to fill the air. Rachel looked around the cabin while she waited. There were books everywhere, old leather-bound volumes stacked on shelves and tables. Classical music was playing softly from an old radio in the corner. This wasn't what she had expected from the stories she'd heard. The man came back with a steaming mug. "Drink this slowly," he said. "Too fast and you'll get sick." The hot chocolate was perfect, rich and sweet with a hint of vanilla. Rachel wrapped her hands around the warm mug and felt life returning to her fingers. "I'm Rachel," she said. "I can't thank you enough for helping me." The man was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. He was standing by the window, looking out at the storm with those strange pale eyes. "Storm's getting worse," he said finally, not giving his name. "Road will be blocked for days. You can't leave tonight." The words hit Rachel like a bucket of cold water. She was trapped, alone, with a man she didn't know, in a place where no one would think to look for her. All the stories came flooding back. What if they were true? What if she had just walked into a nightmare? The man seemed to sense her fear. He stayed on the other side of the room, never coming too close. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "There's a lock on the bedroom door," he said quietly. "You'll be safe." Rachel looked into those ice-blue eyes and saw something unexpected. Loneliness. This wasn't a dangerous man. This was someone who had been alone for so long he'd forgotten how to talk to people. Someone who was trying to help her while keeping his distance because he knew she was afraid. "Thank you," she said again. And this time she meant it for more than just the rescue. The man nodded once and went back to the kitchen. Rachel settled deeper into the chair and listened to the storm raging outside. Tomorrow she would figure out how to get back to her life. Tonight she was warm and safe. Sometimes that was enough. Rachel woke up confused and groggy. The room was unfamiliar, with log walls and a small window showing nothing but white snow outside. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the broken car, the massive man who had saved her life. She was wearing clothes that weren't hers. A soft flannel shirt that was way too big and thick wool socks that came up to her knees. Her interview clothes were nowhere to be seen. Panic shot through her chest. What had happened while she was sleeping? The bedroom door was closed, and she remembered what the man had said about the lock. She tried the handle carefully. It turned easily. She wasn't locked in. That was something, at least. Rachel crept to the window and looked out. The world had disappeared under a blanket of white. Snow was still falling steadily, and she couldn't even see where the road might be. Her car was probably buried completely. By now, she could hear movement in the main room, heavy footsteps and the sound of wood being stacked. The man was awake and moving around. Rachel realized she didn't even know his name. All she knew were the stories people told in town, and those stories weren't comforting. There was a soft knock on the door. "You awake?" came the deep voice from the other side. "Yes," Rachel called back, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "Your clothes are clean and dry. They're hanging on the chair by the door. You had a fever last night. I changed your clothes so you wouldn't get sicker." Relief washed over her. He had been taking care of her, not? She pushed the darker thoughts away. "Thank you," she said. "Storm's going to last 3 more days, maybe 4, he continued. "Radio says the roads won't be clear until next week. You're stuck here." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rachel sank down on the edge of the bed, trying to process what this meant. She was trapped in a cabin with a stranger for a week. No one knew where she was. Her job interview was ruined. Her whole plan for starting over in Denver was falling apart. But worse than that was the fear creeping up her spine. What did she really know about this man? The stories from town painted him as dangerous, unpredictable. What if they were true? What if his kindness was just an act? "I'll leave food outside the door," the man said, his voice softer now. "You don't have to come out if you don't want to. I'll stay in the workshop mostly, give you space." Rachel heard his footsteps moving away. She waited a few minutes, then carefully opened the door just a crack. A plate of scrambled eggs and toast sat on a wooden tray along with a cup of coffee that smelled amazing. Steam was still rising from both. She grabbed the tray quickly and shut the door again. The food was simple but perfectly cooked. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. As she ate, Rachel tried to make sense of her situation. The man, Bear, people called him, had every opportunity to hurt her last night when she was unconscious with fever. Instead, he had taken care of her. He'd given her clean clothes, medicine, and warm food. He was trying to give her space and privacy. These weren't the actions of a dangerous person, but her ex-boyfriend David had seemed kind at first too. He'd brought her flowers and cooked her dinner and told her how special she was. It wasn't until months later that the control started. First, he didn't want her going out with friends. Then he didn't want her working late. Then he didn't want her working at all. By the end, she was practically a prisoner in her own home. Rachel shook her head. This was different. This man was actively trying to stay away from her, not control her. Still, she couldn't shake the fear completely. She spent the morning exploring the small bedroom. There wasn't much to see: a bed, a dresser, a small bookshelf, filled with classic novels. Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy. These weren't the books she'd expect a mountain man to read. Around noon, she heard the front door open and close. Rachel crept to the window and saw the man walking toward a smaller building behind the cabin. He was carrying an armload of wood and some kind of tools. The workshop, she guessed. This might be her chance to learn more about her mysterious host. Rachel gathered her courage and opened the bedroom door. The main room of the cabin was cozy and warm. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and everything was neat and clean. The kitchen was small but well organized, with copper pots hanging from hooks and jars of spices lined up on wooden shelves, but it was the books that really caught her attention. They were everywhere: philosophy, literature, science, history. Medical textbooks were mixed in with poetry collections. Art books sat next to volumes on wilderness survival. This wasn't the collection of someone who was uneducated or uncivilized. On the mantel above the fireplace, there was a single photograph in a silver frame. Rachel moved closer to get a better look. It showed a much younger version of her host, clean-shaven and wearing a suit. He was standing next to a beautiful woman with dark hair, and they were both smiling at a little girl with pigtails, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The man in the photo looked happy and normal. And safe. What had happened to change him into the isolated mountain hermit people feared? Rachel jumped when she heard footsteps on the porch. She rushed back to the bedroom and closed the door just as she heard the front door open. "Left soup on the stove for you," the man called out. "It's still warm." Rachel waited until she heard him moving around in the main room, then opened her door again. "Thank you," she called back. There was a pause. "You don't have to hide," he said finally. "This is your space too for now. I'm not going to hurt you." Rachel stood in the doorway, half in and half out of the bedroom. The man was standing by the fireplace with his back to her, adding wood to the fire. In the daylight, he looked even bigger than he had the night before. His shoulders were broad under a faded flannel shirt, and his hands looked like they could crush stone. But his movements were gentle as he arranged the logs, careful, precise. These were the hands of someone who created things, not destroyed them. "I saw your books," Rachel said quietly. He turned around and she saw surprise in those pale blue eyes. "You like to read?" "I love it. I was an English teacher before ... She stopped herself. She wasn't ready to talk about David, about running away, about the mess her life had become. The man nodded like he understood. "Books are good company, better than most people." There was something sad in the way he said it. Rachel found herself taking a step into the room. "What's your name? I mean, your real name?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "People around here call me Bear. That's not what I asked." Another long pause. "Jake," he said finally. "My name is Jake." It was a start, a real name. A small piece of trust offered across the space between them. "Thank you for taking care of me, Jake," Rachel said. "I know I'm not supposed to be here." Jake looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the fire. "Nobody's supposed to be anywhere," he said quietly. "We just end up where we end up." Rachel didn't know what to say to that, so she went to the kitchen and ladled herself a bowl of the soup. It was thick and hearty, with vegetables and herbs that tasted like they came from a garden. She ate standing at the counter, watching Jake tend the fire. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Rachel was trapped here with this mysterious man for days to come. But for the first time since waking up, she wondered if that might not be the worst thing that could happen to her. Rachel woke up to the most amazing smell. Fresh coffee, bacon, and something sweet that made her stomach growl loudly. She sat up in bed and checked the time on her phone. 8 in the morning. She had slept better than she had in months. When she opened the bedroom door, she found a wooden tray sitting on the floor. Steam was still rising from a plate of fluffy pancakes covered in real maple syrup. There were also scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, fresh orange slices, and a mug of coffee. That smelled like heaven. Next to the plate was a small mason jar with a single wildflower in it. Somehow Jake had found a living flower in the middle of a blizzard. Rachel looked around the main room, but Jake was nowhere to be seen. Through the window she could see him outside chopping wood. Even in the freezing cold, he had gotten up early to make her breakfast. Not just any breakfast, a feast. She carried the tray back to her room and ate every bite. The pancakes were perfect, light and fluffy with just the right amount of sweetness. The coffee was strong but smooth. Everything was made with care, like someone had put real thought into what would make her happy. When she finished eating, Rachel ventured back into the main room. Jake still wasn't inside, but she noticed things she hadn't seen before. There was a thick quilt draped over the chair by the fire, the same chair she had sat in that first night. It hadn't been there yesterday. On the table next to it was a small stack of books that looked like they had been carefully chosen, adventure novels, mysteries, and a collection of short stories by writers she loved. In the kitchen, she found a tin of herbal tea with a note written in neat handwriting. For the cough, drink twice daily. Her throat had been scratchy since the fever, though she hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Jake came back inside carrying an armload of firewood, snow dusting his shoulders and beard. He looked surprised to see her in the main room. "Morning," said quietly, stomping the snow off his boots. "The breakfast was incredible," Rachel said. "You didn't have to do all that." Jake shrugged and started stacking wood by the fireplace. "Had to eat anyway. Doesn't take much more effort to cook for two," but Rachel could see that wasn't true. The pancakes had been made from scratch. She could see flour and eggs and milk still sitting on the counter. The orange slices had been arranged in a perfect fan. The flour had been picked and placed in clean water. Someone had spent time and thought on making her morning special. "Where did you find a flower in the middle of winter?" she asked. "Greenhouse," Jake said, not looking at her. "Got vegetables and herbs growing out there. Few flowers, too, a greenhouse." "Of course." This man was full of surprises. Rachel spent the morning reading by the fire while Jake worked on various projects around the cabin. He fixed a squeaky hinge on a cabinet, replaced a worn washer in the kitchen sink, and organized his impressive collection of books. He moved quietly and efficiently, but she noticed he was always aware of where she was. Not in a creepy way, more like he was making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. Around lunchtime, Jake disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 bowls of soup and fresh bread that was still warm from the oven. He set one bowl on the table next to her chair and took his own to the far side of the room. "You don't have to sit so far away," Rachel said. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Jake looked up from his soup, surprised. "You were afraid of me?" "Of course I was. She gestured at his imposing frame. "You're huge. And everyone in town says you're dangerous." "What do they say exactly?" Jake asked. And there was something in his voice that made Rachel think this wasn't the first time he'd wondered about his reputation. "Just stories. That you don't like visitors. That you're unpredictable." She decided not to mention the darker rumors about women who went missing in the mountains. Jake was quiet for a long time, staring into his soup. "I don't get many visitors," he said finally. "Most people prefer it that way." "Why do you stay up here alone?" Another long silence. Rachel thought he wasn't going to answer, but then Jake set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "Sometimes being alone is easier than dealing with people's expectations," he said. "Up here, I can just be what I am. Not what someone thinks I should be." Rachel understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. She had spent years trying to be what David wanted her to be, quieter, smaller, less independent. It had nearly destroyed her. After lunch, Jake showed her around the cabin. It was bigger than it looked from the outside, with a workshop attached to the back where he made furniture. The pieces were beautiful, a dining table with intricate carved legs, chairs that looked like works of art, a bookshelf with joints so perfect it seemed to be made from a single piece of wood. "You made all this?" Rachel asked, running her hand over the smooth surface of a cabinet. "Keeps me busy," Jake said, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "It's incredible. You could sell these in the city for thousands of dollars." Jake shrugged. "Don't need thousands of dollars up here." The greenhouse was even more impressive. It was warm and humid, filled with tomatoes, lettuce, herbs, and flowers blooming in neat rows. Everything was healthy and green, a perfect oasis in the middle of the frozen wilderness. "How did you learn to do all this?" Rachel asked. "Books mostly, trial and error, internet when I can get a signal." Jake picked a few tomatoes and handed them to her. "These'll be good for dinner." They spent the afternoon in comfortable silence. Rachel read while Jake worked on carving what looked like a wooden bowl. The only sounds were the crackling fire, the wind outside, and the quiet scraping of Jake's knife against the wood as evening approached. Jake started cooking again. Rachel offered to help, but he shook his head. "You're still recovering," he said. "Rest." Dinner was grilled fish with vegetables from the greenhouse and homemade bread. Everything was seasoned perfectly and cooked with obvious skill. Rachel found herself wondering where a mountain hermit had learned to cook like this. "This is amazing," she said. "Where did you learn to cook?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Used to cook for my family," he said finally. "Long time ago." Rachel remembered the photograph on the mantel, the woman and little girl who had made Jake smile. "What happened to them?" she asked gently. Jake's face closed off immediately. "They're gone," he said, standing up abruptly and starting to clear the dishes. Rachel knew she had pushed too far. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to pry." Jake paused at the kitchen sink, his broad shoulders tense. "Not your fault," he said quietly. "Some things are just hard to talk about." That night, as Rachel got ready for bed, she found that Jake had left another cup of the herbal tea on her knitstand, along with an extra blanket and a book she hadn't seen before, a collection of poetry by writers she loved. She sipped the tea and read poems about hope and healing while listening to the wind howling outside. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Not because she was protected from the storm, but because she was with someone who cared enough to notice what she needed before she even asked for it. Jake was nothing like the stories people told. He was gentle and thoughtful and surprisingly educated. He was also deeply lonely, carrying some kind of pain that had driven him to isolation. Rachel found herself wanting to know more about the man behind the careful kindness, but more than that, she found herself not wanting to leave when the storm ended. The thought surprised her. 3 days ago, she had been running toward a new life in Denver. Now, she was wondering if maybe the life she needed had found her instead. On the 4th day, Rachel woke up to the sound of silence. The constant howling of wind had stopped. She looked out the window and saw blue sky for the first time since arriving at the cabin. The storm was finally over. She should have felt relief, but instead a strange sadness settled in her chest. Soon, Jake would help her dig out her car or call someone to pick her up. She would go back to her plan of starting over in Denver. This peaceful bubble they had created would pop, and she would become just another story Jake might tell someday. If he ever talked to anyone long enough to tell stories, Rachel found Jake in the kitchen making coffee, as he had every morning. But today there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Storm's moved on," he said without looking at her. "Roads should be clear by tomorrow." "That's good news," Rachel said, though the words felt like lies in her mouth. Jake nodded and handed her a mug of coffee. Their fingers brushed for just a moment, and Rachel felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static from the dry mountain air. They drank their coffee in awkward silence, both avoiding the elephant in the room. Finally, Rachel couldn't stand it anymore. "What were you before you came up here?" she asked. Jake looked surprised by the direct question. He was quiet for so long that Rachel thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely above. A whisper. I was a doctor, trauma surgeon at Denver General. Rachel nearly choked on her coffee. A doctor? That explained the medical books, the careful way he had taken care of her fever, the precise movements of his hands. What happened? She asked gently. Jake stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered trees. I lost someone. He said, someone I should have been able to save. Rachel waited, sensing there was more to the story. Her name was Lisa, Jake continued, his voice thick with old pain. My wife. We had been fighting that morning about stupid things, money, work schedules, who was supposed to pick up our daughter from school. I was supposed to drive Amy to her piano lesson, but I got called into surgery, emergency case. I told Lisa she would have to do it. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The roads were icy. Lisa wasn't used to driving in snow. She grew up in California. She hit a patch of ice on the mountain road and went over the guardrail. Rachel's heart clenched. She could see where this was going. I was in surgery when the ambulance brought them in, Jake whispered. My wife and my 6-year-old daughter. Lisa was already gone, but Amy ... double quote, his voice broke. Amy was still alive when they wheeled her into my, still breathing, still fighting. Tears were running down Rachel's face now. She wanted to go to him, to comfort him somehow, but something in his posture told her he needed space to finish this story. The other doctors tried to take the case, said I was too close to it. But I pushed them aside. I thought I could save her. I thought being her father made me the best person to save her. Jake's laugh was bitter and broken. I was wrong. My hands were shaking. I couldn't think straight. I made a mistake. A small one, but in trauma surgery, small mistakes kill people. Jake? Rachel whispered, but he kept going. Amy died on my table. My little girl died because I was too proud and too scared to let someone else save her. Because I couldn't admit that sometimes love makes you weaker, not stronger. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Jake's ragged breathing. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that accidents happen, that he had done his best in an impossible situation. But she knew those words would be meaningless to him. He had been carrying this guilt for years. So you came up here, she said finally, quit the hospital. Sold the house. Bought this place with cash and never looked back. Jake turned around and Rachel saw that his eyes were red with unshed tears. People in town are right to be afraid of me. I'm dangerous. Everyone I love dies. That's not true, Rachel said. Firmly, isn't it? You don't know me, Rachel. You don't know what I'm capable of. Rachel stood up and walked across the room until she was standing right in front of him. Jake was so tall she had to crane her neck to look at his face. I know you saved my life, she said. I know you've taken care of me for 4 days without asking for anything in return. I know you get up early every morning to make me breakfast and leave flowers by my plate. I know you noticed I had a cough and made me tea without me even mentioning it. Jake looked down at her, something unreadable in his pale eyes. You want to know what I was running from when my car broke down? Rachel continued. I was running. From a man who claimed he loved me but spent 3 years slowly destroying who I was. He never hit me, but he controlled everything I did, what I wore, where I went, who I talked to. He convinced me I was worthless, that I couldn't survive without him. Jake's jaw tightened. He hurt you. Yes, but not the way you think. He hurt me by making me smaller, by taking away my choices, by convincing me that love meant giving up everything that made me who I was. Rachel reached out and touched Jake's arm. He didn't pull away. You've shown me more kindness in 4 days than he showed me in 3 years. You've given me space when I needed it and company when I wanted it. You've taken care of me without making me feel helpless. Rachel, Jake said quietly, but she wasn't finished. You're not dangerous, Jake. You're wounded. There's a difference. What happened to your family was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault. You were trying to save your daughter. Any parent would have done the same thing. Jake closed his eyes. You don't understand. I should have been there. If I hadn't been so focused on work, if I had just driven Amy to her lesson like I was supposed to, they would still be alive. And if your patient had died because you left in the middle of surgery, you would have blamed yourself for that too, Rachel said. You can't save everyone, Jake. No one can, not even doctors. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her with something that might have been hope. How do you know that? Because I spent 3 years blaming myself for David's moods. If I had just been prettier or quieter or more supportive, maybe he wouldn't have been so angry. Maybe he would have loved me the way I wanted to be loved. It took me a long time to realize that his problems weren't mine to fix. They stood there looking at each other, two broken people who had found unexpected comfort in each other's pain. Rachel could see the exact moment when Jake's walls started to crumble. His face softened and he reached up to brush a tear from her cheek with surprising gentleness. I don't know how to do this anymore, he whispered. How to be around people. How to let someone care about me. You've been doing fine so far, Rachel said, covering his hand with hers. Better than fine. Jake smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less haunted. I should probably warn you, he said. I'm out of practice with conversation. And I haven't been around a woman in 5 years. I might be a little awkward. Rachel laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I'll take awkward over charming any day. Charming men are dangerous. What about mountain hermits with questionable social skills? Mountain hermits who make amazing pancakes and grow flowers. In blizzards, those are definitely safe. Jake laughed, a rich sound that filled the cabin with warmth. For the first time since arriving, Rachel didn't want the snow to melt. She wanted to stay in this moment, in this place, with this man who had shown her what gentleness really looked like. Outside, the sun was shining on fresh snow, making the whole world sparkle like diamonds. Inside, 2 wounded souls had found something worth healing for. On the 5th morning, Rachel woke to the familiar smell of breakfast, but something was different. Along with the usual coffee and whatever delicious meal Jake had prepared, she could smell something floral and sweet. When she opened her bedroom door, she gasped. The breakfast tray was there as always, but today it was decorated with a small bouquet of wildflowers in every color imaginable: purple, yellow, white, and soft pink. They were arranged in 3 mason jars of different sizes, creating a miniature garden on her breakfast tray. Rachel knelt down and breathed in their fragrance. How had Jake managed to find so many different flowers in the middle of winter? She picked up the note tucked between the jars, written in his careful handwriting. For bringing color back into a gray world. Her heart did a little flip in her chest. She had never received a more beautiful or thoughtful gift. Jake was outside splitting firewood when she carried her tray to the main room. Through the window she watched him work. His movements were strong and rhythmic, and despite the cold, he had worked up enough of a sweat to take off his heavy jacket. Rachel found herself admiring the way his muscles moved under his flannel shirt. When he came inside, stamping snow off his boots, Rachel was waiting with a cup of coffee for him. The flowers are beautiful, she said, handing him the steaming mug. Thank you. Jake's cheeks were already red from the cold, but Rachel thought she saw them get a little redder. Figured you might be getting tired of looking at nothing but white snow. How do you have so many different kinds of flowers growing? Started the greenhouse 5 years ago. Couldn't stand the idea of never seeing colors again. Jake took a sip of his coffee and looked at the bouquet. Didn't think I'd ever have anyone to share them with? The simple honesty of his words made Rachel's chest tight with emotion. She was starting to understand that Jake didn't say things he didn't mean. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture deliberate. They spent the morning in easy companionship. Rachel read while Jake worked on his latest furniture project, a rocking chair that was taking shape under his skilled hands. Every so often, she would look up and catch him watching her, and he would smile and go back to his carving. Around lunchtime, Jake surprised her by asking if she wanted to help cook. I'm not very good in the kitchen, Rachel warned. David always said I was hopeless at cooking. Jake's jaw tightened at the mention of her ex. David sounds like he was wrong about a lot of things. Want to try making bread? Rachel hesitated. David had banned her from the kitchen after she burned dinner one too many times. But Jake was looking at her with such gentle encouragement that she found herself nodding. Making bread with Jake was nothing like cooking with David had been. When she made mistakes, and she made several, Jake just smiled and showed her how to fix them. When she got flour all over herself and the counter, he laughed and wiped it off her cheek with his thumb. When the dough stuck to her hands, he patiently taught her how to knead it properly. "You're a good teacher," Rachel said as they waited. "For the bread to rise, you're a good student." David was an idiot. The simple statement made Rachel laugh. "You don't even know him." "I know enough." Any man who would try to make you feel bad about yourself is an idiot. Jake's eyes were serious. "You're smart and kind and stronger than you think. Anyone with eyes can see that." Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said something so nice about her. That afternoon, Jake showed her more of his world. They walked through the forest behind the cabin, following paths he had cleared over the years. The snow was deep but manageable in the snowshoes he had found for her. Everything was pristine and beautiful, like walking through a Christmas card. "It's so peaceful here," Rachel said, breathing in the clean mountain air. "That's why I stayed. After everything happened, I needed quiet. Needed space to think." "Don't you get lonely?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I did, but I told myself it was better than getting hurt again, or hurting someone else." They stopped at a clearing where Jake had built a simple wooden bench. The view was spectacular: mountains stretching to the horizon, forests of pine and aspen, and sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. "This is where I come when I need to remember why I'm alive," Jake said quietly. Rachel sat down on the bench beside him. "And why is that?" "For a long time, I didn't have a good answer. I was just going through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, existing but not really living." Jake looked at her sideways. "But this week I remembered what it feels like to have a reason to get up in the morning." "What reason is that?" "Making breakfast for someone who appreciates it. Having someone to talk to who actually listens. Watching someone discover things they didn't know they were capable of." Jake's voice was soft. "Having someone look at me like I'm a good man instead of a dangerous one." Rachel's heart was beating so fast she was sure Jake could hear it. "You are a good man." "I'm starting to believe that might be true." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the sky. Rachel realized she hadn't thought about her old life, about David or her ruined job interview or her uncertain future, in hours. For the first time in years, she was completely present in the moment. That evening, Jake cooked an elaborate dinner: grilled steaks, roasted vegetables from his greenhouse, and the bread they had made together. He even opened a bottle of wine he said he had been saving for a special occasion. "What makes tonight special?" Rachel asked as he poured the wine. "You're here," Jake said simply. "You're really here, not just hiding in the bedroom waiting for the storm to end. You're talking to me like I'm human. Like I matter." "You do matter, more than you know." They talked through dinner about books they loved, places they wanted to travel, dreams they had given up on. Jake told her about his plans to expand the greenhouse, maybe even sell some of his furniture online. Rachel shared her secret dream of writing a novel, something she had never told anyone, not even David. "What's stopping you?" Jake asked. "I don't know if I'm good enough. What if I try and fail?" "What if you try and succeed?" Jake countered. "Besides, failing at something you love is better than succeeding at something that makes you miserable." After dinner, they sat by the fire with their wine. Rachel found herself studying Jake's face in the flickering light. His features were strong and masculine, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Jake nodded. "Why do you bring me breakfast in bed every morning? You could just leave it in the kitchen." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "My mom used to bring me breakfast in bed when I was sick," he said finally. "It was the most caring thing anyone had ever done for me. Made me feel loved and taken care of. I guess I wanted to give you that feeling. It works, Rachel whispered. It's the best part of my day. Jake looked at her then, and Rachel saw something. In his eyes that made her breath catch, want, hope, the same feelings that were building in her own chest. Rachel, he said quietly, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, like a prayer. Like a promise, she set down her wineglass and moved closer to him on the couch. Yes? I don't want you to leave tomorrow. The words hung in the air. Between them, Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. I don't want to leave either, she whispered. Jake reached up and cupped her face in his large, gentle hands. I know this is crazy. We barely know each other, and I'm not good at this anymore. You're better at this than you think, Rachel said, covering his hands with hers. You've been taking care of me all week. You've been kind and patient and gentle. You've made me feel valuable again. You are valuable. You're the most valuable thing that's ever happened to me. Jake leaned forward and kissed her then, soft and sweet and careful, like she was made of something precious. Rachel felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was what a kiss was supposed to feel like coming home, like being treasured, like being loved for exactly who you were. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Please. Stay, Rachel smiled through her tears. I thought you'd never ask. Rachel woke up in Jake's arms for the first time on the 6th morning. They had fallen asleep on the couch by the dying fire, wrapped in the thick quilt, talking until nearly dawn about everything and nothing. She had never felt so safe, so completely at peace, but something was wrong. Jake was awake beside her, his body tense with alertness. Do you hear that? He whispered. Rachel listened carefully. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the mountain air. The sound was getting closer. Search and rescue? She asked, though something in Jake's expression told her it was more complicated than that. Jake sat up, his face grim. Not unless someone reported you missing. The realization hit Rachel like a punch to the stomach. Somehow, David had found her. She had told her landlord she was moving to Denver, had mentioned the route she planned to take. If he had called the police, claimed she was missing or in danger. I have to tell you something, Rachel said quickly. My ex-boyfriend, David, he's been trying to find me since I left. He's convinced himself that I was kidnapped or brainwashed, that I didn't really want to leave him. Jake's jaw tightened. How would he know where to look? I told my landlord. I was driving to Denver for a job interview. If David questioned him, Rachel's voice trailed off as the helicopter sound grew louder. He probably told the police I was missing. Made it sound like I was taken against my will. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Through the trees, Rachel could see the helicopter circling, searching. It was painted with the colors of the county sheriff's department. They'll land at the road, Jake said quietly. Then they'll follow the path to the cabin. We have maybe 10 minutes. Jake, I can explain to them. I can tell them I'm here by choice. Jake turned to look at her, and Rachel saw something that broke her heart. He was already pulling away, already protecting himself from the pain he knew was coming. You don't understand, he said. I'm the mountain man everyone's afraid of. You're a pretty woman who's been missing for a week. How do you think this is going to look? Rachel opened her mouth to argue, but Jake held up a hand. Even if they believe you, even if there are no charges, the story will be everywhere. The media loves this kind of thing. Woman rescued from mountain hermit, Stockholm Syndrome in the Rockies. Your face will be on every news channel in the state. Rachel felt sick. She hadn't thought about the publicity, about how the story would be twisted and sensationalized, about how it would affect Jake. I won't let them hurt you, she said firmly. Jake smiled sadly. You can't stop them, Rachel. And I won't let you destroy your life trying to protect mine. The helicopter was directly overhead now. Through the window, they could see it landing in the clearing near the road. Rachel could make out several figures climbing out, sheriff's deputies, search and rescue volunteers, and one man in civilian clothes who made her blood run cold. David. He's here? She whispered. He actually came. Jake looked where she was pointing and saw David gesturing wildly to the deputies, pointing toward the cabin. Even from a distance, his agitation was obvious. He really thinks you were kidnapped, Jake observed. No, Rachel said bitterly. He knows exactly what he's doing. This isn't about rescuing me. This is about controlling me. About proving that I can't survive without him. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the search party organize itself. What do you want to do? I want to tell them all to go away and leave us alone, Rachel said. But that's not going to happen, is it? Jake shook his head. They're going to want to talk to you alone, make sure you're not being coerced. And they're going to want to talk to me about why I didn't report finding you. Rachel could see the resignation in his eyes. He was already preparing himself to lose her, already building his walls back up. The thought made her furious. Listen to me, she said, grabbing his hands. What we have is real. What happened between us this week is the most real thing I've ever experienced. I'm not going to let them take that away. Jake squeezed her hands. Rachel, you have a whole life waiting for you. A job interview, a fresh start in Denver. You can't throw all that away for someone like me? Someone like you? You mean someone kind and gentle and caring? Someone who sees me for who I really am? Someone who makes me feel safe and valued and loved? Rachel's voice was getting louder. Why exactly would I want to throw that away? Before Jake could answer, they heard voices approaching through the trees. Heavy boots crunching through snow, radio chatter, and David's voice rising above the rest. She's probably terrified. God knows what he's done to her. We need to be prepared for anything. Jake flinched at the words. Rachel saw him straightening, his shoulders preparing to face whatever was coming. She realized he was going to try to protect her by pushing her away, by making it easier for her to leave. Don't you dare, she said fiercely. Don't you dare try to be noble and self-sacrificing. I've had enough of men making decisions for me. There was a loud knock on the door. Sheriff's Department, open up. Jake looked at Rachel one more time. Whatever happens, I want you to know that this week has been the best week of my life. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. Jake walked to the door and opened it. 3 sheriff's deputies stood on the porch, hands resting on their weapons. Behind them, Rachel could see David pushing forward, his face a mask of concern that she now recognized as completely fake. Sir, I'm Deputy Martinez. We're looking for a missing woman, Rachel Thompson. We have reason to believe she might be here. She's here, Jake said calmly. She's been here since her car broke down in the storm 6 days ago. Is she hurt? Is she free to go? The deputy's hand moved closer to his weapon. She's fine, and yes, she's free to go. She's been free to go the whole time. David pushed past the deputies. Rachel, thank God you're okay. He moved toward her like he was going to embrace her, but Rachel stepped back. I'm fine, David. You shouldn't have come. David's face showed hurt and confusion, but Rachel could see the calculation behind his eyes. Honey, you've been missing for almost a week. Everyone's been worried sick. Your landlord said you never made it to Denver. I had car trouble. Jake helped me, that's all. Jake? David looked at the mountain man with obvious suspicion. And you didn't think to contact anyone? Let people know she was safe? Phone lines were down because of the storm, Jake said evenly. No cell service up here for 6 days? David's voice was getting sharper. Come on, Rachel. Let's get you out of here and to a hospital. You need to be checked out. I don't need a hospital. I'm fine. Deputy Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions, alone. Just to make sure you're okay. Rachel saw Jake tense up. This was the moment where she had to choose between the life everyone expected her to have and the life she had discovered she wanted. Of course, she said, but I'd like Jake to stay. He saved my life. The deputy looked uncertain. Ma'am, it would be better if we talked privately. I have nothing to hide, Rachel said firmly. Jake has been nothing but kind to me. He's taken care of me, kept me warm and fed, and asked for nothing in return? If you want to question me, he stays. David's mask was starting to slip. Rachel, you're not thinking clearly. This man isolated you, cut you off from help. That's classic kidnapper behavior. No, Rachel said, her voice getting stronger. Classic. Kidnapper behavior is what you did to me for 3 years. Isolating me from my friends, controlling my money, telling me I was worthless without you. Jake did the opposite. He gave me space, respected my choices, and made me feel valuable again. The clearing went silent except for the wind in the trees. David's face had gone white, then red. You're not well, he said finally. This man has clearly done something to you. Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing, Rachel. So is emotional abuse. Rachel shot back, and I'm done with it. Deputy Martinez was looking back and forth between them, clearly trying to figure out what was really going on. Ma'am, were you held here against your will? No, I was given shelter during a life-threatening storm. I stayed because I wanted to. Did this man threaten you or hurt you in any way? No, he took care of me. He's been nothing but gentle and kind. The deputy made some notes, then looked at Jake. Sir, why didn't you report finding her? Like I said, phones were down. And she wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was. She was safe, warm, and fed. I didn't see any emergency. David stepped forward again. This is ridiculous. Rachel, I drove all the way up here to save you. I was worried sick. Don't you care about that? Rachel looked at the man who had controlled her life for 3 years, then at Jake, who had given her back her sense of self in just 1 week. The choice wasn't even close. No, David, I don't care about your worry. Because it was. Never really about me, it was about your need to control me. Well, you can't control me anymore. I'm done. David's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, Rachel. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't make it on your own. Maybe, Rachel said calmly, but that will be my choice to make. She turned to Jake, who was watching. The whole scene with careful eyes. I meant what I said earlier. I'm not leaving unless you want me to. Jake looked at her for a long moment, and Rachel held her breath. Finally, he smiled. That same gentle smile that had made her feel safe. From the very beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, paperwork, and tense conversations. Deputy Martinez was thorough, but fair, clearly trying to get to the truth of what had happened. Rachel answered every question honestly, describing how Jake had saved her life and taken care of her without ever making her feel threatened or trapped. David grew more agitated with each answer that didn't fit his narrative. He kept insisting that Rachel was confused, traumatized, not thinking clearly. When the deputy asked him to step back and let Rachel speak for herself, his true colors started to show. You don't understand, David said, his voice getting louder. She's always been weak. She can't make good decisions on her own. That's why she needs someone to take care of her. Rachel felt Jake tense beside her. Deputy Martinez raised an eyebrow. Sir, Miss Thompson seems perfectly capable of speaking for herself, the deputy said calmly. She thinks she is, but she's not. She's naive, impractical. She would have died out here if I hadn't organized this rescue. David turned to Rachel, his face showing the controlling anger she remembered so well. You're coming home with me right now. We'll talk about this when you're thinking more clearly. No, Rachel said firmly. I'm not going anywhere with you, David. We're done. We've been done for months. You don't mean that. You're just confused because of what this man did to you. What exactly do you think I did to her? Jake spoke for the first time since the questioning began. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. David whirled around to face him. You isolated her, manipulated her, probably drugged her. How else do you explain her behavior? I fed her, kept her warm, and treated her with respect, Jake said evenly. If that's manipulation, then yes, I'm guilty. You had no right to keep her here? I didn't keep her anywhere. She stayed because she wanted to. Deputy Martinez stepped between them. That's enough, Mr. Thompson. I need you to calm down. It's not Thompson, Rachel said quietly. I never married him. I never even wanted to marry him. David's face went white, then red. We were going to get married. We talked about it. You talked about it. I tried to change the subject every time you brought it up. Because you were scared of commitment. Because you needed time to mature. No, Rachel said, her voice getting stronger. Because I didn't want to marry someone who made me feel small and worthless. Because I didn't want to spend my life walking on eggshells around someone who thought I was too stupid to make my own decisions. Deputy Martinez was taking notes again, clearly seeing the dynamic between Rachel and David for what it really was. Ma'am, did you feel safe in your relationship with Mr. Wilson, David Wilson? And no, I didn't feel safe. I felt controlled and diminished and afraid to be myself. She's lying, David exploded. I gave her everything. I took care of her. I protected her. From what? Jake asked quietly. From herself, from making stupid mistakes, from people who would take advantage of her. David was spiraling now, his careful mask completely gone. She needs someone strong to guide her, to make the hard decisions. She's too emotional to be rational. The silence that followed was deafening. Even David seemed to realize he had revealed too much. Deputy Martinez closed his notebook. Mr. Wilson, I think you should head back to town. Miss Thompson has made her position clear. You can't just leave her here with this maniac. Ma'am, the deputy said to Rachel, do you feel safe staying here? Rachel looked at Jake, who was watching her with those pale blue eyes full of concern and love. Safer than I've felt in years. Then, that's your choice to make. You're an adult, and there's no evidence of any crime here. David made one last desperate attempt. Rachel, please. Think about what you're giving up. Your apartment, your job prospects, your future, all for what? Some fantasy about living in the woods with a stranger? Rachel thought about the question. Seriously, what was she giving up? An apartment she had never felt comfortable in because David had chosen it. Job prospects in a city she had picked because it was far away from him. A future that had felt more like a prison sentence than a new beginning, and what was she choosing instead? A man who brought her breakfast in bed every morning, who encouraged her dreams instead of crushing them, who made her feel valuable and loved and safe, a life that felt like coming home. I'm not giving up my future, David. I'm choosing it. After the officials left, taking a reluctant and still arguing David with them, Rachel and Jake sat in the sudden quiet of the cabin. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, making everything golden and peaceful. Are you sure about this? Jake asked quietly. Once the story gets out, and it will get out, there's no going back. Your name will be connected to mine forever. Good, Rachel said. I want my name connected to yours. Jake shook his head. You don't understand. David was right about one thing. The media will have a field day with this. Woman abandoned civilized. Life for mountain man, Beauty and the Beast in the Rockies. They'll make me sound like some kind of primitive caveman who seduced you away from civilization. Let them people who matter will know the truth. What about your dreams? Writing that novel? You can't do that hiding in the mountains. Rachel stood up and walked to where Jake was sitting. She knelt in front of his chair and took his hands. In hers, Jake, listen to me. For 3 years, David convinced me that my dreams were silly, that I wasn't talented enough to be a writer, that I should focus on being practical instead. In 1 week, you've encouraged me more than he did in 3 years. You think I should write? You believe I have something to say. You do have something to say. Then why couldn't I write when I was with him? Why did I give up before I even tried? Jake was quiet, thinking. Because he made you doubt yourself. Exactly. And you make me believe in myself? I can write anywhere. Jake, I can write better here with you supporting me than I ever could in Denver trying to prove something to people who don't matter. Jake searched her face. What if you get tired of the isolation? What if you miss the city, miss having choices and opportunities? What if I don't? What if this is exactly where I'm supposed to be? Jake pulled her up into his lap, holding her. Close, I love you, he said quietly. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again, but I love you, Rachel. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see good in people even when they can't see it themselves. I love you too, Rachel whispered. I love the way you take care of me without making me feel helpless. I love your gentleness and your creativity and the way you make me feel like I'm worth something. They held each other as the sun set behind. The mountains painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Outside, the world continued to turn, but inside the cabin, time seemed to stand still. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we figure it out together. I'll need to go back to town eventually, tie up loose ends, get my things. Face whatever media circus David has probably started by now. I'll come with you." Rachel pulled back to look at him. "You don't have to do that. I know how hard it is for you to be around people." "It's hard to be around people who judge me before they know me," Jake corrected. "It's easy to be around you. And if people are going to judge us anyway, they might as well judge us together." Rachel smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the fireplace. "Together sounds perfect." "Besides," Jake said with a grin, "someone needs to be there to correct all the stories about me being a dangerous mountain man. Can't have people thinking I don't know which fork to use at fancy restaurants." "Do you know which fork to use at fancy restaurants?" "I was a surgeon, Rachel. I've been to plenty of hospital fundraisers. I can navigate a 7-course meal without embarrassing myself." Rachel laughed, delighted by this glimpse of the sophisticated man Jake had been before grief drove him to the mountains. "You're full of surprises. You haven't seen anything yet?" As, night fell, they made dinner together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with an ease that felt like they had been doing this for years instead of days. Jake told her stories about his life before, about medical school and the high-pressure world of trauma surgery. Rachel shared her own stories about college, about the dreams she had put aside, about the woman she had been before David made her. Smaller later, as they sat by the fire reading, Jake working on a woodworking manual while Rachel browsed through a collection of poetry, she realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the desperate, clingy need she had mistaken for love with David, but this quiet contentment, the sense of being exactly where she belonged with exactly the right person. "Jake," she said. "Yes? Tomorrow morning, can I make you breakfast in bed for once?" Jake looked up from his book, that wonderful smile spreading across his face. "I'd like that very much." Rachel smiled back, already planning what she would cook for the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. Outside? Snow began to fall again, but neither of them minded. They had everything they needed right here. 3 months later, Rachel stood on the porch of the cabin she now called home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The world looked different now, not just because spring was replacing winter, but because she was seeing it through the eyes of someone who had finally found where she belonged. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. The media attention had been intense but brief, a few sensational headlines about the mountain man's bride that faded quickly when other stories took their place. David had tried to keep the story alive, giving interviews about Rachel's obvious mental breakdown, but his controlling behavior became apparent to anyone who listened to him for more than 5 minutes. Rachel had returned to town with Jake to settle her affairs, and watching him navigate the curious stares and whispered comments had been a revelation. He handled everything with quiet dignity, answering questions honestly and refusing to be baited into anger or defensiveness. By the end of their week in town, several people had approached Rachel to tell her that Jake seemed like a good man, and they hoped she would be happy. The transition hadn't been completely smooth. There were days when Rachel missed the convenience of city life, when she felt isolated and wondered if she had made the right choice. But those moments became fewer and farther between as she settled into the rhythm of mountain life. She had started writing again, really writing, for the first time in years. The novel was flowing out of her like water from a broken dam, a story about a woman who finds herself by losing everything she thought she wanted. Jake had converted part of his workshop into a writing space for her, with a desk facing the mountains and shelves for the books that arrived regularly from online orders. "Good morning, beautiful." Rachel turned to see Jake coming up the path from the greenhouse, carrying a basket of vegetables and flowers. Even after 3 months, the sight of him still made her heart skip a beat. He had trimmed his beard and cut his hair, revealing strong cheekbones and laugh lines around his eyes. But it was the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world, that made her fall in love with him all over again every day. Good morning yourself, handsome. How are the tomatoes coming along? Better than expected. We'll have more than we can eat soon. Might be time to think about taking some to the farmer's market in town. This was new, Jake's willingness to venture into town regularly, to interact with people beyond their small circle. Rachel knew it was partly because of her, but mostly because he was healing, finding his way back to being part of the world instead of hiding from it. That sounds wonderful. Maybe we could set up a stand together, sell your furniture and my vegetables. Your vegetables? Rachel grinned. I've been learning. Ask me to identify a tomato hornworm now. I dare you. Jake laughed, the sound rich and warm in the mountain air. I'm very proud of how you've taken to gardening, among other things. The other things included learning to chop firewood, maintain the greenhouse, preserve food for winter, and navigate the mountain trails in all kinds of weather. Rachel had surprised herself with how quickly she adapted to the physical demands of mountain life. She was stronger now, both physically and emotionally. They went inside together, moving around the kitchen in the comfortable dance they had perfected over the past months. Jake started coffee while Rachel began preparing breakfast, fresh eggs from the chickens they had acquired last month, bacon from a pig farmer down the mountain, and bread made from flour they ground themselves. I have something to tell you, Rachel said as she cracked eggs into a bowl. Jake looked up from the coffee maker, alert to something in her tone. Good something or concerning something? Good something, very good something. Rachel took a deep breath. I got an email yesterday from that agent I queried. She wants to read the full manuscript. Jake's face lit up like Christmas morning. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and swept Rachel up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. That's incredible, Rachel, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. It's just a request for the full manuscript. She might still reject it. She won't. She's going to love it as much as I do. Jake set Rachel down but kept his arms around her. This calls for a celebration. Fancy dinner tonight. I'll make that pasta you love. With the mushrooms from the forest? With the mushrooms from the forest and wine from the cellar and candles. On the table, the whole romantic treatment. Rachel stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. You spoil me. That's the plan. I intend to spoil you for the rest of our lives. The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. They had talked about the future in general terms, but this felt different. More concrete. Jake, Rachel said quietly, are you asking me something? Jake looked down at her, suddenly serious. What if I was? What if I was asking you to marry me, to stay here with me forever, to build a life together in these mountains? Rachel's heart started beating faster. I'd say yes. I'd say yes without hesitation. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box that Rachel had never seen before. Her breath caught in her throat. I made this for you, he said, opening the box to reveal a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. It was carved from wood, the same wood he used for his furniture, with a small diamond set in the center. I know it's not traditional. If you want something else, something from a store, It's perfect, Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's absolutely perfect. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were shaking slightly. Rachel Thompson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children, if we're blessed with them? Will you grow old with me in these mountains and let me bring you breakfast in bed for the next 50 years? Yes, Rachel said, laughing and crying. At the same time, yes to all of it, yes to everything. Jake kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of all the love